The Silent Journey. The Hope drifted quietly through the cold, black void of space. A medical ship, sleek and unassuming, it carried supplies that were crucial for the survival of distant colonies in the galaxy. Its white hull glistened softly under the distant light of stars. The ship's crew, a mixture of doctors, nurses, engineers, and a few seasoned pilots, moved about their duties with calm efficiency. It was a peaceful mission, humanitarian work, far from the chaos of war. Captain Naomi Ortiz stood on the bridge, her hands folded behind her back as she looked out the large window. The stars stretched out before her in an endless sea, like pinpricks of light scattered on a dark canvas. The calmness of the journey had a strange sense of peace to it, almost too perfect. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It had been a long while since she'd felt this unsettled, this aware of the silence around her. "We're nearing the next colony, Captain," reported Lieutenant Samuel, her navigator, his voice breaking the stillness. "Estimated time of arrival is in 3 hours." Captain Ortiz nodded. "Good. Let's keep the pace steady. These supplies are vital for the colony's survival. We can't afford any delays." The crew of the Hope continued their work, unaware that this calm journey would be shattered by a force no one had expected. In the shadows of space, far beyond the reach of the ship, something watched. A fleet of ships, dark and ominous, moved quietly, hidden by the folds of deep space. The Galactic Empire had long since turned its gaze from Earth. The once great empire, which had crushed civilizations and ruled vast portions of the galaxy, had grown complacent. Earth had become a distant memory, a planet that once fought back, but now seen as insignificant. But deep in the heart of their empire, something had changed. There were whispers of Earth's military power, rumors of ancient ships hidden, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. And now, the Empire was curious. The Hope, though far from a warship, had become an easy target. Its medical supplies were valuable, and its relatively weak defenses made it an ideal vessel to test the strength of Earth's will. The fleet of the Galactic Empire, led by an officer whose loyalty to the Emperor was beyond question, had decided to make Earth remember its place. And so, they followed the Hope, moving stealthily, preparing to strike. Back on the bridge, Captain Ortiz's unease grew. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, like a slow-moving storm on the horizon. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. She turned to Lieutenant Samuel again, her voice steady but firm. "Increase surveillance. I want a full scan of the surrounding space. Something feels off." Samuel glanced up at her, slightly surprised. "Aye, Captain. Scanning now." As he worked, Ortiz looked out at the vast expanse of stars, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. The ship was alone out here, too far from any larger fleet for backup. If something happened, they would be on their own. It was a sobering thought, but one she had long ago accepted. The scanner beeped suddenly, drawing Ortiz's attention. Samuel's eyes widened as he studied the results. "Captain," he said, his voice tense, "I'm picking up something. A fleet. It's large, and it's not on any of our charts. They're cloaked." "Cloaked?" Ortiz repeated, her brow furrowing. The Empire had technology that allowed them to hide their ships from standard scans, but it was rare. Earth had never been able to develop such technology, not on this scale. "Should we prepare for evasive maneuvers?" Samuel asked, his eyes flicking back to the scanners. Captain Ortiz hesitated, her mind racing. It didn't make sense. The Empire had no reason to come after a medical ship. But then, she knew better than to trust logic when it came to the Empire. They were ruthless, unpredictable. And if they were here, it could only mean one thing. They were planning something far more dangerous than just a random attack. "Yes," Ortiz said, her voice hardening with resolve. "Get to the weapon systems. I want shields up. We don't know what they're after, but I won't wait for them to make the first move." The bridge crew sprang into action, adrenaline beginning to pulse through the air. The usual calm was replaced with a quickening tension as they prepared for what might come. Ortiz's eyes never left the screen as she watched the enemy fleet materialize, slowly becoming visible as their cloaking field began to flicker. The shapes of the enemy ships came into view, massive and dark, unlike anything she had seen before. "How many are there?" Ortiz asked, her voice tight with concern. 10, maybe more," Samuel replied, his voice barely a whisper. "They're huge, Captain. It's not just any fleet." Ortiz could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. A fleet of this size meant something more than just an attack. It was a statement. Earth had made enemies far stronger than they had ever imagined. And now, the first step in the fight for survival was about to begin. "Get us out of here," she ordered sharply. "Set course for the nearest colony. We need to warn them, and we need to buy time." But as the crew scrambled to make the necessary adjustments, Ortiz's mind was already racing ahead. How could they survive against such overwhelming force? The Hope was just a medical ship. What could it possibly do against the might of the Galactic Empire? In the distance, the enemy fleet moved closer, its dark shapes growing larger with every passing second. Time was running out. Earth's hidden strength, something the Empire never expected, was about to reveal itself. But not yet. For now, the Hope had only one chance to survive. The silent journey had come to an end, and the storm was about to break. The first strike. The calm of space was shattered as the first wave of the Empire's fleet closed in on the Hope. The crew had no time to prepare for the impending disaster. The harsh reality of their situation began to sink in. Captain Naomi Ortiz stood firm at the bridge, her eyes locked on the radar. The enemy fleet, large and menacing, had emerged from the cloak of stealth like a predatory beast. It was too late to escape. They were surrounded. Her fingers clenched around the armrests of her chair as the tension in the air grew thick. "Captain, shields are at 40% and dropping fast." Lieutenant Samuel's voice broke through the rising panic on the bridge. His hands flew over the console, trying desperately to activate defense systems that weren't nearly powerful enough to fend off the Empire's overwhelming force. "Deploy all defensive measures," Ortiz commanded sharply. She wasn't about to go down without a fight. She had seen the destructive power of the Empire firsthand during her time in the military, but this was different. This was Earth's most vulnerable medical ship. If they couldn't fight back, they would be at the mercy of the Empire. The ship's shields flared and flickered as the first wave of enemy fire struck the Hope. A massive explosion rocked the vessel, throwing the crew off balance. The ship groaned under the assault, alarms blaring across every section. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered in the corridors. The crew scrambled to maintain control as the ship was battered by the sheer force of the enemy's attack. "Captain, they're targeting our engines," reported Ensign Lila, the ship's communications officer. Her face was pale, her fingers trembling as she tried to reroute power to the damaged systems. "Don't let them," Ortiz barked. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart pounded. They couldn't afford to lose power. If their engines were destroyed, they would be sitting ducks. "Fire back. Use whatever we've got left." With limited firepower, the crew unleashed a barrage of return fire. The medical ship's small, under-equipped weapon systems weren't meant for large-scale combat, but they were all they had. A series of weak shots tore into the first ship of the Empire's fleet, but the return fire from the enemy was devastating. The Hope shuddered with each blow, and Captain Ortiz's knuckles turned white as she gripped the command console. "Shields at 10%, shouted Lieutenant Samuel. "We're not going to make it unless—" "Unless what?" Ortiz interrupted sharply, her mind racing. There was no backup coming, no reinforcements. They were alone in the vastness of space, and every second that passed brought them closer to destruction. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently to the side, and the lights dimmed. An explosion rocked the starboard side of the medical ship, sending debris flying through the air. The crew scrambled to hold on, gripping anything they could find to steady themselves. The ship was taking a beating, and with each strike, it seemed more and more like they wouldn't survive this assault. Then, just when all seemed lost, the ship's eye, an ancient system that had been dormant for decades, flickered to life. The captain's chair began to hum, and Ortiz felt a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the air. Something deep within the ship's systems had awakened. "Captain," Ensign Leela said with disbelief in her voice. "The AA. It's activating some kind of hidden system." Ortiz snapped her head toward Leela. "What do you mean, hidden system?" Leela looked at her console, her eyes wide. "There's something buried deep in the ship's core. I don't know how, but it's waking up." Ortiz's heart skipped a beat. What could possibly be hidden in the ship's core? The Hope wasn't just a medical vessel. It had been built long ago, during the early days of humanity's space exploration. Perhaps it wasn't as unarmed as they thought. "Get me full access to that system," Ortiz ordered. "Now." As Leela worked quickly, the entire bridge fell silent. The crew, in the middle of a fight for their lives, could only watch as the ship's ancient systems began to hum with life. For the first time in years, something more than just a medical ship was stirring deep inside the Hope. It was as if Earth's forgotten legacy was slowly coming back to life. Suddenly, the lights on the bridge flared brightly as an unfamiliar interface appeared on the screen. Leela gasped. "Captain, this isn't a medical system. It's military." Ortiz's eyes widened. "What? How is that possible?" The AI responded with a calm, eerie tone. Ancient defense protocols activated, all systems coming online. The tension in the room rose sharply. The ship's old and forgotten weapon systems were being reactivated one by one. Missiles, energy cannons, and defensive grids that had lain dormant for centuries were coming to life. A powerful, hidden fleet was buried beneath the Hope, but the ship had been kept under tight control to prevent its activation, until now. Ortiz's heart raced. The Hope was no longer just a medical ship. It was a fortress, a weapon. Earth's forgotten strength was about to be unleashed. "Captain," Samuel yelled, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "The enemy fleet is closing in on us. We don't have much time." Ortiz steadied herself. There was no time for hesitation. She had one chance to fight back, one chance to make Earth's enemies remember who they were. "Activate the defense systems," Ortiz ordered firmly. "We're not running anymore. It's time to fight." The ship's dormant weapons systems began to hum and crackle to life, and the Hope turned from a fragile medical vessel into a force to be reckoned with. The Empire had made a grave mistake by underestimating humanity. The crew of the Hope was about to show the Empire just how deadly a medical ship could be. As the weapons powered up, Ortiz felt a surge of adrenaline. The first strike had come from the Empire, but now Earth was about to strike back. The battle for survival was just beginning. The awakening. The silence of space was broken by the hum of systems awakening. Deep within the Hope, a series of ancient mechanisms kicked into motion, as if responding to a call that had been dormant for centuries. The crew could feel the change. The air was charged with anticipation. Captain Naomi Ortiz stood at the helm, staring intently at the screens before her. The AI spoke again, its voice steady but resonating with the weight of history. Defense systems fully online. Weapons targeting active. Ortiz's heart pounded. The Hope had never been designed for war. It had been a medical vessel, a peaceful envoy to the far reaches of space. But as the ship's core systems whirred to life, it was clear that Earth had prepared for this moment long before anyone had realized it. "Captain," Samuel said urgently, his fingers flying over his console. "I've detected a massive surge of energy from the enemy fleet. They're preparing for another strike." Ortiz didn't flinch. The time for running was over. With Earth's ancient warships coming back online, they had a chance. A slim one, but a chance nonetheless. "Divert all power to the forward shields," Ortiz ordered, her voice calm despite the pressure. "We need to survive this next wave, and then we'll strike back." Ensign Leela, whose hands were shaking as she worked to control the ship's internal systems, looked up. "Captain, you might want to see this." Ortiz turned, and a new set of data flickered on the screen. It was a map of the Hope's weaponry, missile silos, energy cannons, and hidden bays that had remained undetected for so long. The ancient warships were not just hidden within the Hope, they were embedded within its very structure. The ship had been designed as a fortress, a ship so deep within Earth's technological archives that even the Empire had no idea of its existence. Ortiz couldn't believe her eyes. She'd heard rumors of Earth's lost weaponry, but no one had truly believed that such powerful systems were still intact. Yet, here they were, ready for activation. "Let's use them," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We've been given a second chance. Let's make it count." The AI's voice responded immediately. Weapons primed. All systems ready for launch. The Empire was not waiting. The fleet closed in, preparing for their next attack. Ortiz could feel the rumble of their massive ships moving through space, their intent clear. They had underestimated humanity. They had made the grave mistake of thinking that Earth had nothing left to fight with. But now, the tables were turning. "Full power to the weapons grid," Ortiz commanded. On the bridge, the lights flared brightly as the ship's ancient weapon systems roared to life. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, and the crew could feel the ship's energy surging. The Empire had no idea what was coming. The first volley was launched with terrifying speed, missiles streaking out of the ship's hull, their targets locked on the leading vessels of the enemy fleet. The missiles were ancient, but their power was undiminished. They tore through space, their engines blazing a trail of light as they made their way toward the enemy. Impact in 3, 2, 1. Sanduel counted down, his voice tense. Then, a flash of light exploded across the screen. The lead Empire ship took the hit directly, its shields collapsing instantly under the force of the blast. The ship was rocked, and debris scattered across the void as the explosion sent shockwaves through space. Ortiz felt a surge of triumph, but there was no time to celebrate. The enemy fleet retaliated immediately, firing their own barrage of energy beams at the Hope. The ship's shields flared brightly under the assault, absorbing the blows but groaning under the strain. The ship shuddered, and alarms screamed across the bridge. "Shields holding at 40%. Lieutenant Sanduel reported, his voice strained. "We need to do more damage to them, or we'll be overrun." Ortiz's mind raced. They couldn't rely on the weapons alone. They had to think smarter. "Activate the EMP burst," Ortiz ordered. The AI's voice responded instantly. "EMP burst initiating. Targeting all enemy ships." A sudden pulse of energy emanated from the Hope, and in an instant, the enemy ships were caught in a wave of electromagnetic disruption. Their energy shields flickered and went offline, and for a brief moment, the fleet was exposed. Ortiz didn't hesitate. "All forward weapons, fire." The Hope unleashed a barrage of high-powered laser beams and explosive projectiles. The enemy ships, now vulnerable, were hit hard. One of the larger vessels exploded into a bright fireball, its massive structure torn apart by the sheer force of the Hope's assault. The shockwave rippled through the fleet, causing a chain reaction as several smaller ships were caught in the blast. "Direct hits," Samuel said, his voice filled with awe. "They're taking heavy damage." Ortiz allowed herself a small smile. The enemy fleet had expected an easy target, a medical vessel with no defenses. They had been wrong. But just as the crew began to feel a sense of victory, a new danger emerged. A massive warship, far larger and more powerful than the others, appeared at the heart of the enemy fleet. This was no ordinary vessel. It was the flagship of the Empire, its weapons more advanced, its shields nearly impenetrable. "This is bad," Leela said, her voice trembling. "That ship is enormous. If we don't destroy it, We don't have a chance. Ortiz's eyes narrowed. This was the true test, the final battle. They had no choice now. They would either fight and win, or they would fall. But Earth's wrath had been awakened, and the Empire had made a critical mistake in underestimating the power of humanity. Prepare for the final strike, Ortiz said, her voice filled with determination. Let's show them what Earth is capable of. The final battle had begun. The Empire's wrath. The massive Empire flagship loomed in the distance, its imposing silhouette casting a dark shadow over the battlefield. It was unlike anything the crew of the Hope had ever seen. Its sheer size made the other ships in the enemy fleet look small by comparison. This was the heart of the Empire's force, and it was about to bring its full might to bear. Captain Naomi Ortiz's eyes narrowed as she studied the readings on the screen. The flagship's weapons systems were charging, glowing bright and ominous, and its shields were a dense, impenetrable barrier. No matter how much the Hope had been upgraded, this ship's power was almost beyond comprehension. Captain, Samuel said, his voice tense, I'm detecting an energy buildup in the flagship. They're preparing to fire. Ortiz gripped the armrests of her chair. She knew what that meant. The Empire's primary weapon, a beam capable of disintegrating entire fleets, was about to unleash hell. If they couldn't find a way to stop it, the Hope would be destroyed in one strike. Do we have any chance of outrunning it? Ortiz asked, though she knew the answer. No, Samuel replied, shaking his head. We're too close. If that weapon fires, we're done. Ortiz's mind raced. They needed to disable the flagship's weapon systems, but with its shields still up, that was nearly impossible. She looked at the AI console and saw an opportunity. Leela, she said, her voice calm despite the storm brewing outside. Is there any way we can overload their shields or disrupt their energy flow? Leela's fingers flew over the console. I'm analyzing the flagship's energy grid now. It's complex, but there's a weakness. The ship's power source is heavily concentrated in the rear section. If we can hit it, we might be able to breach their shields long enough to fire at the core. Ortiz's eyes locked on Leela. Then let's do it. Samuel quickly adjusted their course, aiming the Hope toward the flagship's rear. The medical vessel, now more of a warship than ever before, rocketed through space with speed and precision. They had to strike fast. Time was running out. Lock on to their energy core, Ortiz ordered. Target the weak points in the rear. If we hit them just right, we can overload their systems. The AI confirmed the commands, and a calm voice came over the comms. Weapons systems locked. Energy core targeting initialized. Ortiz took a deep breath. The Hope had been designed to save lives, to carry hope through the stars. But now, it was Earth's last weapon against an overwhelming threat. The crew, once a team of medical professionals, had transformed into warriors in their moment of need. Their mission was no longer to heal. It was to fight and survive. Prepare for impact, Ortiz said. On my mark. The crew fell silent as they approached the flagship, the enormous ship growing larger on the view screen. The pulse of enemy fire from the fleet continued to strike the Hope, but the ship's shields were holding, thanks to the newly reactivated defenses. The crew was focused, every movement deliberate as they closed in on their target. 3, 2, 1. Fire. The weapons on the Hope roared to life as a barrage of high-energy missiles and laser beams were launched toward the flagship's vulnerable energy core. The shots streaked through space, their velocity impossible to track with the naked eye, but every crew member could feel the intensity in the air. For a split second, everything was still. Then, a massive explosion erupted from the rear of the flagship, sending shockwaves through space. The ship's shields flickered, sputtered, and then collapsed completely. The Empire's flagship was momentarily exposed. Direct hit. Shields are down, Samuel shouted. Ortiz didn't hesitate. Now, while they're vulnerable, fire everything we have. The Hope unleashed its full arsenal. Missiles and energy blasts poured into the exposed flagship, tearing into its hull. The massive warship shuddered under the barrage, and the crew watched in awe as the once invincible vessel began to break apart, its superstructure buckling under the force of the assault. But the flagship wasn't going down without a fight. As it burned, the enemy fleet regrouped, and a second, even larger wave of firepower rushed toward the Hope. The ship rocked with each impact, its shields barely holding under the onslaught. The crew struggled to maintain control, but the damage was mounting. "We can't take much more of this," Leela cried, her voice frantic. "The shields are at 20%, and the engines are starting to fail." Ortiz knew they were running out of time. They had done damage to the flagship, but now the remaining enemy ships were closing in for the final blow. It was a matter of seconds before they were completely overwhelmed. The medical ship, once a beacon of hope, was now fighting for its life. "Lieutenant Samuel, prepare to initiate evasive maneuvers," Ortiz said, her voice low but determined. "We need to buy time." "Captain, I don't know if we can outrun them," Samuel said, his voice tinged with desperation. Ortiz didn't answer immediately. She stared out into the blackness of space, calculating their options. There was no escaping this fight. If they were going to survive, they had to take down the remaining Empire ships, quickly. "We have no choice," Ortiz said firmly. "We push forward. Full power to the engines. It's time to end this." The crew scrambled to their stations as the final battle loomed before them. The fate of the Hope and of Earth rested on the outcome of this moment. The Empire had underestimated humanity's strength once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. The war was far from over. But now, for the first time, the crew of the Hope had the upper hand. They were fighting back, and the Empire would learn to fear the might of Earth. The last stand. The battle in space raged on, the once serene backdrop of the stars now shattered by the chaos of warfare. The Hope, scared and battered but not broken, hurtled through the blackness. Captain Naomi Ortiz's hands tightened around the controls, her face set in grim determination. The ancient warship was a marvel of human ingenuity, but its systems were now stretched to their breaking point. She could feel every vibration of the ship as it shuddered from each impact, every second testing the limits of their strength and endurance. "Shields at 10%. Samuel's voice rang out, sharp with urgency. "The engines are losing power, Captain. We can't take much more of this." Ortiz knew the gravity of the situation. Their odds were shrinking with each passing moment. The flagship had been destroyed, but the remaining fleet of the Empire was still formidable, and they were closing in fast. "We need to end this now," Ortiz said firmly. "Leela, what's our status on the remaining weapons systems?" Leela's face was pale, but her fingers danced across the control panel. "The main cannons are still operational, but we can only fire them once before we risk overloading the entire system. We need to make sure that shot counts." Ortiz nodded, her mind working in overdrive. "We're running out of time. The enemy fleet is almost in position for their final assault. We can't let them overwhelm us." She turned to Samuel. "Prepare to fire on the remaining ships. We need to hit them where it hurts. Target their engines and weapon systems." Samuel quickly adjusted their trajectory, his hands moving with precision, knowing this would be their one shot. "Locked on target, Captain." Ortiz's eyes scanned the battlefield. The enemy fleet had reformed, now more determined than ever to wipe out the Hope. Their ships were lined up in tight formation, their weapons aimed directly at them. It was a final push to finish the job. "Captain." Leila's voice broke through the tension. "They're going to fire. 3 capital ships, charging weapons." Ortiz didn't hesitate. She took a deep breath, making the final decision that could determine everything. "Fire the main cannons, now." The blast from the Hope was nothing short of a fury unleashed. The energy wave ripped through space, connecting with one of the largest ships in the Empire's fleet. The impact was immediate, a catastrophic explosion that sent shockwaves through the surrounding ships. The massive vessel crumpled under the force, its hull splitting open as fire erupted from within. But as the first ship fell, The remaining ships retaliated with renewed fury. Laser beams, energy pulses, and missiles rained down upon the Hope, flooding the shields with an onslaught of power. The medical ship groaned under the attack, but it wasn't finished. They still had one more shot left. "We've got one more chance," Samuel yelled over the comms, his voice strained but full of resolve. "We can't dodge them forever. We need to land a critical hit, or we're done." Ortiz's gaze was fierce as she gripped the controls. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Full power to the engines. Leela, target the enemy fleet's command vessel. It's their only chance of coordinating the attack." The crew worked with the precision of soldiers, the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. As the Hope sped across the battlefield, its ancient cannons charged once more, this time aimed at the heart of the Empire's command structure. The weapon systems roared, and another explosion echoed across space as the Empire's command vessel erupted in a massive fireball. The remaining ships faltered, their coordination thrown into disarray. The once mighty fleet was now a broken shell of its former self. "We've done it," Leela whispered in disbelief, her voice trembling as she watched the fleet splinter apart. "We've won." But the victory felt hollow. The price of survival had been steep. The Hope was heavily damaged, its systems failing under the strain of the battle. Ortiz surveyed the crew, her mind still focused, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We've only won this round," she said, her tone unwavering. "There's more to come. The Empire won't stop." Even as the enemy ships began to retreat, damaged beyond repair, the reality of their situation was not lost on the crew. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. The Empire would regroup, they would learn, and they would strike again. But for the first time since the attack began, Ortiz allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had done the impossible. Against all odds, humanity had struck back. Earth had awakened, and in doing so, had proven that even the might of the Galactic Empire could not crush the spirit of its people. "We fought for our survival," Ortiz said softly, glancing around at her crew. "And we won. But this war is far from over. We need to prepare for what's coming next." The crew of the Hope nodded grimly, knowing that this battle was only the beginning. But they also knew something the Empire didn't. They were no longer the prey. Earth had shown its strength, and now the Empire had a real fight on its hands. The war for humanity's survival had just begun. The aftermath. The echoes of the battle still reverberated in the cold vacuum of space as the Hope drifted through the debris. The once vibrant battlefield was now a graveyard of shattered ships and broken dreams. The enemy fleet, battered and fractured, was retreating, but it left behind a haunting silence. Inside the ship, the crew worked tirelessly to repair systems that had been pushed to their breaking points. Sparks flew from the walls as Leela and Samuel worked to keep the ship operational, while Captain Naomi Ortiz stood in front of the view screen, staring at the wreckage of the once mighty Empire fleet. They had won, but victory had come at a high cost. "We did it," Ortiz whispered to herself, her voice heavy with the weight of the words. It wasn't the victory she had hoped for. The damage to the Hope was extensive, and there was still the looming threat of retaliation. The Empire was not one to bow down quietly. "Leela, how long until we can leave this system?" Ortiz asked, her voice firm, but tinged with exhaustion. Leela glanced at her console, her face tense. "We can make the jump in about 6 hours, but we're running low on power. The shields are barely holding, and the engines. Captain, I don't know how much more we can push them." Ortiz exhaled slowly, the enormity of their situation setting in. If they stayed in this system any longer, they risked being caught by any reinforcements the Empire could send. She turned to Samuel, who had been monitoring the external communication channels. "Any signs of reinforcements?" she asked. "Not yet, but I'm tracking several ships on the outskirts of the system," Samuel replied. "They're still too far to be a serious threat right now, but we're definitely not out of danger. We have to move, Captain." If we don't, the Empire will be here soon. Ortiz nodded grimly. The Empire would be back, that much was certain. But Earth had sent a message that they were no longer weak prey. Humanity had proved its resilience. They had awakened Earth's ancient warships, and now they had proven their might. "All right," she said, her voice unwavering despite the exhaustion that clung to her. "Prepare for a jump to the outer rim. We'll find a safe place to lay low and regroup. The war isn't over yet. This was just one battle, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The crew nodded in unison, understanding the gravity of their mission. They had fought for survival, but now they had to fight for their future. The Empire would not be easily defeated, and they would need every ounce of strength, strategy, and ingenuity that humanity had to offer. But for now, the ship could rest. The crew could catch their breath, and for a fleeting moment, they could feel the pride of what they had accomplished. Ortiz moved toward the viewport, her eyes scanning the remnants of the battle. The shattered ships, the silent blackness of space, it all spoke volumes. They had turned the tide, but the true war was just beginning. The Empire wouldn't stop until they had crushed every last trace of resistance, and the crew of the Hope was ready to stand in their way. On the bridge, the crew worked as one, knowing they had survived the first wave of the Empire's wrath. They had awakened Earth's warships, and now they had a chance to defend their planet. But Ortiz knew that the Hope and its crew would need more than just ancient technology. They would need every ally, every resource, and every advantage they could find. They could not let their guard down. "Captain," Leela called out, her voice steady. "The repairs are as complete as they're going to get. We're ready for the jump." Ortiz turned, her mind already thinking ahead. "Good. Initiate the jump, and make sure we're cloaked. We don't want to attract any attention." The engines hummed to life, a low, steady vibration that signified the ship's readiness. As they prepared to jump to a safer part of the galaxy, Ortiz couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "We'll be back," Ortiz muttered under her breath, her voice laced with both determination and resolve. "We'll show the Empire that they've made a terrible mistake." With a final glance at the remnants of the battle and the empty space that stretched out before them, the Hope disappeared into the void, its crew ready for whatever awaited them in the uncertain future. The war had only just begun, the rising tide. As the Hope surged through the stars, leaving the remnants of the battlefield behind, the mood on the ship was a mixture of cautious relief and underlying tension. The crew had managed to hold their own against the full force of the Galactic Empire, but they knew better than to celebrate. The war was far from over, and this was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. Captain Naomi Ortiz stood at the command station, her gaze fixed on the view screen, though there was little to see, just the black expanse of space. She felt a quiet, deep satisfaction, knowing that Earth had sent a message, a warning to the Empire. Humanity was not to be underestimated, but she also knew that their victory was fragile. They had won one battle, but 100 more would follow. "Captain, we've made it to the outer rim." Lila's voice broke into her thoughts. "We should be safe for now, but we don't have much time to rest. We need to start planning our next move." Ortiz nodded, turning to face her crew. The battered ship was slowly regaining power, but it was clear that they couldn't stay hidden here forever. They needed to find allies, gather resources, and prepare for the inevitable Empire retaliation. The Galactic Empire wouldn't take their defeat lightly. They would regroup, and when they came back, they would come back stronger. "Let's gather the crew in the briefing room," Ortiz ordered, her tone steady and commanding. "We need to make our next move count." An hour later, the entire crew gathered in the briefing room. Captain Ortiz stood at the head of the table, her face illuminated by the holographic map of the galaxy that flickered in front of her. The crew, bruised but resolute, took their seats. Ortiz could feel the weight of the room. This was it. Their fate, and the fate of Earth, depended on the decisions they made in the coming days. "We've done the impossible," Ortiz began, her voice firm, though the exhaustion in her eyes was undeniable. "We've survived the Empire's attack, and we've struck a major blow. But we can't forget that the Empire is relentless. They will come for us again, and they will be stronger next time." Samuel, their tactical expert, was the first to speak. "We need to prepare for that. They'll probably send more ships, bigger ones. We need to find a way to stop them before they have a chance to regroup." Leela, their engineer, was already analyzing the data. "The systems on the Hope are barely holding up. We've pushed everything to its limits. We need to get to a supply base, preferably somewhere close to a neutral zone, to gather resources and make the necessary repairs." Ortiz listened carefully, her eyes scanning the room as the crew discussed possible strategies. She knew their situation was precarious. They had limited resources, and the ship's capabilities were rapidly deteriorating. The enemy would soon realize that their fleet had been seriously crippled, and when they did, they would launch another assault. "We can't wait for them to come to us," Ortiz said, her voice sharp with determination. "We need to find an ally who can help us fight back. I know the neutral zones are full of smugglers, mercenaries, and rebels. If we can win them over, we'll have a better chance of surviving." "I'll start reaching out to some contacts," Leela said, already pulling up encrypted communication channels. "But we'll need to be careful. The Empire has spies everywhere. If they catch wind of us making alliances, it could be disastrous." Ortiz nodded. "That's why we'll keep our movements hidden. We'll be ghost ships for now. No trace, no signal. We'll need to rely on stealth and our knowledge of the galaxy to stay one step ahead." The crew fell into an uneasy silence, each of them processing the weight of their conversation. The reality of their position was beginning to settle in. The odds were still stacked against them, and the Empire's power was vast. But Earth had sent a message. They weren't helpless. They had shown that when pushed to the brink, humanity could strike back. Ortiz's gaze hardened as she stood up, the resolve in her eyes reflecting the strength of the crew. "We've already shown that we can fight. Now we need to prepare for the next battle. We'll need all the allies we can get, and we'll need to build our forces. This won't be a war we win on our own. We need to unite the scattered factions across the galaxy." She turned to her crew. "This is bigger than just Earth. This is about standing against tyranny, standing for the freedom of every sentient being in this galaxy. And we're going to make sure the Empire knows that we will not back down." A fire ignited in the eyes of the crew. They had seen the destruction, felt the weight of the fight, and understood what was at stake. The fight for survival had just begun, but they had no intention of losing it. Ortiz took a deep breath and gave the command, "Let's make history. Prepare for the next phase." As the crew of the Hope set their course, they understood the war was far from over. The Empire had tasted defeat, but they would regroup, adapt, and come again. But so would humanity. Earth had awakened its ancient warships, and with every battle fought, they would grow stronger. The crew's mission was clear: to unite the galaxy, to find allies, to prepare for the Empire's next move, and most importantly, to make sure that humanity's voice would never again be silenced.